joy, slew victims, visited the temples, with no moderation in his transports, while Plancina's insolence increased, and she then for the first time exchanged for the gayest attire the mourning she had worn for her lost sister. Centurions streamed in and hinted to Piso that he had the sympathy of the legions at his command. "Go back," they said, "to the province, which has not been rightfully taken from you, and is still vacant." While he deliberated what he was to do, his son Marcus Piso advised speedy return to Rome. "As yet," he said, "you have not contracted any inexpiable guilt, and you need not dread feeble suspicions or vague rumours. Your strife with Germanicus deserved hatred, perhaps, but not punishment, and by your having been deprived of the province, your enemies have been fully satisfied. But if you return, should Sentius resist you, civil war is begun, and you will not retain on your side the centurions and soldiers, who are powerfully swayed by the yet recent memory of their general, and by a deep-rooted affection for the Caesars." Against this view, Domitius Celer, one of Piso's intimate friends, argued that he ought to profit by the opportunity. It was Piso, not Sentius, who had been appointed to Syria. It was to Piso that the symbols of power and a praetor's jurisdiction and the legions had been given. In case of a hostile menace, who would more rightfully confront it by arms than the man who had received the authority and special commission of a governor? And as for rumours, it is best to leave time in which they may die away. Often the innocent cannot stand against the first burst of unpopularity, but if Piso possesses himself of the army and increases his resources, much which cannot be foreseen will haply turn out in his favour. Are we hastening to reach Italy along with the ashes of Germanicus, that, unheard and undefended, you may be hurried to ruin by the wailings of Agrippina and the first gossip of an ignorant mob? You have on your side the complicity of Augusta and the emperor's favour, though in secret, and none mourn more ostentatiously over the death of Germanicus than those who most rejoice at it. Without much difficulty, Piso, who was ever ready for violent action, was led into this view. He sent a letter to Tiberius accusing Germanicus of luxury and arrogance, and asserting that, having been driven away to make room for revolution, he had resumed the command of the army in the same loyal spirit in which he had before held it. At the same time he put Domitius on board a trireme with an order to avoid the coast and to push on to Syria through the open sea away from the islands. He formed into regular companies the deserters who flocked to him, armed the camp followers, crossed with his ships to the mainland, intercepted a detachment of new levies on their way to Syria, and wrote word to the petty kings of Cilicia that they were to help him with auxiliaries, the young Piso actively assisting in all the business of war, though he had advised against undertaking it. And so they coasted along Lycia and Pamphylia, and on meeting the fleet which conveyed Agrippina, both sides in hot anger, at first armed for battle, and then in mutual fear, confined themselves to revilings, Marsus Vibius telling Piso that he was to go to Rome to defend himself. Piso mockingly replied that he would be there as soon as the praetor who had to try poisoning cases had fixed a day for the accused and his prosecutors. Meanwhile Domitius, having landed at Laodicea, a city of Syria, as he was on his way to the winter quarters of the 6th Legion, which was, he believed, particularly open to revolutionary schemes, was anticipated by its commander Pacuvius. Of this Sentius informed Piso in a letter, and warned him not to disturb the armies by agents of corruption, or the province by war. he gathered round him all whom he knew to cherish the memory of Germanicus, and to be opposed to his enemies, dwelling repeatedly on the greatness of the general, with hints that the state was being threatened with an armed attack, and he put himself at the head of a strong force, prepared for battle. Piso, too, though his first attempts were unsuccessful, did not omit the safest precautions under present circumstances, but occupied a very strongly fortified position in Cilicia, named Celenderis. He had raised to the strength of a legion the Cilician auxiliaries which the petty kings had sent, by mixing with them some deserters, and the lately intercepted recruits, with his own and Plancina's slaves. And he protested that he, though Caesar's legate, was kept out of the province which Caesar had given him, not by the legions, for he had come at their invitation, but by Sentius, who was veiling private animosity under lying charges. Only, he said, stand in battle array, and the soldiers will not fight when they see that Piso, whom they themselves once called father, is the stronger, if right is to decide, if arms is far from powerless. He then deployed his companies before the lines of the fortress on a high and precipitous hill, with the sea surrounding him on every other side. Against him were the veteran troops drawn up in ranks and with reserves, a formidable soldiery on one side, a formidable position on the other. But his men had neither heart nor hope, and only rustic weapons extemporized for sudden use. When they came to fighting, the result was doubtful only while the Roman cohorts were struggling up to level ground. Then the Cilicians turned their backs and shut themselves up within the fortress. Meanwhile Piso vainly attempted an attack on the fleet, which waited at a distance. He then went back, and as he stood before the walls, now smiting his breast, now calling on individual soldiers by name and luring them on by rewards, sought to excite a mutiny. He had so far roused them that a standard-bearer of the 6th Legion went over to him with his standard. Thereupon Sentius ordered the horns and trumpets to be sounded, the rampart to be assaulted, the scaling ladders to be raised, all the bravest men to mount on them, while others were to discharge from the engines spears, stones, and brands. At last Piso's obstinacy was overcome, and he begged that he might remain in the fortress on surrendering his arms, while the emperor was being consulted about the appointment of a governor to Syria. The proposed terms were refused, and all that was granted him were some ships and a safe return to Rome. There, meantime, when the illness of Germanicus was universally known, and all news, coming as it did from a distance, exaggerated the danger, there was grief and indignation. There was, too, an outburst of complaint. Of course this was the meaning, they said, of banishing him to the ends of the earth, of giving Piso the province. This was the drift of Augusta's secret interviews with Plancina. What elderly men had said of Drusus was perfectly true, that rulers disliked a citizen-like temper in their sons, and the young princes had been put out of the way because they had the idea of comprehending in a restored era of freedom the Roman people under equal laws. This popular talk was so stimulated by the news of Germanicus's death, that even before the magistrate's proclamation or the Senate's resolution there was a voluntary suspension of business. The public courts were deserted, and private houses closed. Everywhere there was a silence broken only by groans. Nothing was arranged for mere effect, and though they refrained not from the emblems of the mourner, they sorrowed yet the more deeply in their hearts. It chanced that some merchants who left Syria while Germanicus was still alive brought more cheering tidings about his health. These were instantly believed, instantly published. Every one passed on to others whom he